Hey guys, just a quick note before we begin that the show may contain spoilers and adult language, but that's just because we know how to have a good time. Stick around, you'll be glad you did.
You are here for me to enlighten you.
You ever act like this again, you're barred for life.
It's just vile and base.
It's kind of embarrassing.
If you know your lines, then you can forget them.
Oh, I get it. It's very clever.
Hello, peoples, and welcome to Esoterica Cinema, the podcast where we take films from the cinematic multiverse and discuss the hell out of them. My name is Jason Peters, and with me, as always, is the New York Times best-selling author of trashy romance novels, Mr. Ryan Siebold.
What's up, Jason? How's it going, buddy?
It's going well, and might I just say that I am very honored that you, of all people, would choose to bestow us with your presence here, Mr. Ryan Siebold. I know you write with a pen name, but yeah, from what I understand, you have a very strong following along what I imagine is a nice, 35 to 55 middle-aged woman crowd with these trashy romance novels.
Yeah, well, that's why I moved to Florida. I mean, that's kind of the whole thing here, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so tell us about how'd you get started in this whole thing?
Well, my pen name is Ralph Buscanti. Maybe you've heard of my work. Yeah.
Absolutely, I have. I mean, you can't go into an airport without seeing a Buscante novel.
Absolutely not. Yeah, I made a pretty good name for myself under the Buscanti label. I just didn't want to. These women, they read these books and they just go bananas, and I can't have all this at my doorstep, and invite this here to my house, my domicile, my dojo. I've just got to keep some peace and quiet. So I keep my Ryan persona here separate with all the podcast fans that, hit me up constantly. And then my Ralph Buscanti. I mean, just saying it out loud. Totally, it's got a nice ring to it, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's just like those it's just like the commercials that you hear on the radio. Ralph Buscante.
Yes.
Like, dude, I hear that all the time. It's so
From
wonderful.
Acclaimed author,
now,
Ralph Buscanti.
Absolutely. Now, there was a little bit
where
of
books are sold.
Yes. Now, so here's what I would
listeners.
like to know, to let all of our listeners know. And again, you could be very honest here. I happen to know for a fact that your readers do not listen to our program, so you don't have to worry about tipping any secrets or anything. Like, they're where they are. They're listening to female-oriented podcasts, most likely. Did you get into writing these novels for the money or for the women or for both? Or is it more like you had this storytelling power within you and you kind of wanted to give something back to these women that you knew were kind of like lonely? And
look, here's the thing.
Where did all of this kind of come from?
I am nothing if not horny. I am horny, and I needed an outlet. I needed something to put this out into the world. I wasn't sure, obviously I don't have the body for OnlyFans. So I went with the next best thing where I could hide behind a pen name of Ralph Buscanti, just to put it out there again. Buscanti. It's fun to say. And it gave me a place to kind of just get all this out there. Out into the world for it makes me feel better about myself that I could just, get it all off my chest. Quite literally
Absolutely.
And figuratively. Let me ask you, Jason, have you read my work?
Well, I don't know. This might be a literary confession. Yes, I have actually read many of them. I believe my favorite is Porkin' Along the Seas 2.
Yeah.
That was a really good one. I never expected that the hog farmer would go on to become a pirate, let alone such a lusty pirate. And, even as sort of like a straight white male, the way that you evoke these characters and their physiques. I mean, even I was getting a little hot and bothered. I'm not going to lie. So for anyone out there that has not read Mr. Buscante's work, like I said, Hoggin' on the Seas Porking Along the Seas, rather, excuse me. The one is good, but it really sets up everything that's to come in the sequel. You know, it's kind of so, you know, the second one's kind of like the Two Towers of the Porking Along the Seas franchise.
Yeah.
But still start with the first one. If that doesn't do it,
it is serialized. You got to start with the first one, and otherwise you're gonna have no idea what's going on. Like it's a pretty in-depth plot.
Yeah,
Moist
absolutely.
Canyon was a great seller of mine. I loved Moist Canyon.
That was actually a really beautiful tale. Like that one took some turns that I didn't quite see coming.
Tale.
And then the way that the twists and turns, you had that beautiful metaphor where the twists and turns actually reflected the switchbacks of the Moist Canyon itself.
Right.
It was beautiful.
Yeah.
It was beautiful. So for anyone who has not read, again, Moist Canyon or Porking Along the Seas, great place to start. In the meantime, we have a movie to go ahead and discuss with you this week. Ryan, why don't you go ahead and tell our listeners what that movie is?
Today's film is a nostalgia-soaked tale from 1987 called The Monster Squad. And I can't wait to talk to you about this. This was a lot of fun to watch. Little outside our normal library that we would normally pull from, but I'm glad we got to break up some of that. We've been doing, a lot of heavy foreign films like La Ventura and Tokyo Story, and here we are with Monster Squad, and that's what makes this show so great.
Slides in nicely right along Critters.
Google has this described as 5 youngsters find themselves up against the combined might of Dracula, the Mummy, the Gill Man, and Frankenstein's monster, who arrive in town in search of a magic amulet. Fantastic. From 1987, directed by Fred Decker, and written by the great Shane Black. So
yes,
he had a lot going on in 1987. We're going to get to all of that, Jason.
Indeed.
But as always, I'm going to ask you, like I do every week, what did you think about this movie?
Ryan, I am going to be very happy to tell you right after we listen to this trailer. And believe me, I'm going to be very happy to tell you I'm about to gush because I mentioned at the end of the last episode, this is a nostalgia glasses episode for old boy Jason here. We'll get into that right after we hear the trailer for The Monster Squad.
You know who to call when you have ghosts. But who do you call when you have monsters?
We're the Monster Squad. What's a squad? It's like Miami Vice, I think.
They're young and inexperienced.
Naughty virgin.
They're a bit disorganized.
Monsters are not real.
We don't know that, sir.
2,000-year-old dead guys do not get up and walk away by themselves.
But when strange things start happening in town...
There's a monster in my closet.
Ooh, look at that big, scary monster.
What's happening? 2 weeks to the werewolf. Silver bullet?
They're the only ones ready to do battle.
Something's out there that's killing people. And if it's monsters, nobody's gonna do a thing about it but us.
And the creatures of the night.
All right, Ryan. Now, so if you don't know me personally, if you're just one of our many wonderful listeners, and thank you so much for joining us week after week, you may not know that The Monster Squad is a very personal film for me. Now, a large part of this is because this is my Goonies, right? I've said this before. And I've come to find that there's actually a number of people where they feel the same way about this film. But whereas everybody else, that I grew up with when we were kids, loved the shit out of the Goonies, couldn't get enough Goonies, Goonies never die, Truffle Shuffle, all that sort of stuff. For me, that film was The Monster Squad. And it's funny because, when I was younger, we had a local video store, right? Run by this chick, Dinah. I may have mentioned that on this show before. Maybe I haven't. And this was by far the film that we rented the most. For any of the youngsters listening out there, this was a period of time when you couldn't just buy films at all. Like, it's not like where, with DVD, you can buy literally every single film save for the handful that don't make it to licensing issues. No, like VHSs cost $100 and you had to have a license to be able to buy them. And so you couldn't just go out and buy a film. So we rented this one over and over and over from my local video store. And Ryan, I believe this is your first time seeing this film. Is that correct?
It is. Yeah. And I'm a better man for it.
Okay, cool. So, you don't have to go into the specifics yet. We'll get into that, but it sounds like you enjoyed it then.
Yes, I did.
That's awesome. I love that. Warms my heart to hear that. So
yeah, I mean, this was Goonies was PG. This was PG-13. This had a little more edge to it. It just felt like it was the cool kids Goonies. Like Goonies is like family entertainment, something you'd see as the ABC movie of the week or something like that. Like it was just a little more toned down. And this was like, dude, I mean, kids full on like chain smoking cigarettes in this.
I know, dude.
Zero fucks
13-year-olds
given.
drinking beer and like watching like girls undress through the
Dude, they're
window
trying
and
to,
shit
yeah,
like that.
there is
Like-
almost titties in this. This is almost a
Like
Ralph
it's-
Buscanti novel. This is,
Yeah, it's kind of like a PG-13 Porky's a little bit at times.
Right,
you know,
yeah.
Which, and again, it was just, this was also reflective of the time in the 80s.
you hear about legends of those films, right? When we're kids of like, oh yeah, remember when like kids movies could like show smoking and boobs and stuff? This is like right on the cusp of those kinds of films. And
Yeah. To the point that it's actually a little jarring, actually, to go back and like the first couple times, like, there's like a couple times where they like call their teacher a homo and stuff like that. And you're like, oh, that's like not very appropriate these days.
It harkens back to an earlier time.
Like,
Yes.
Yeah, so it's definitely a little coarse with the kind of like locker room language. There's like a couple other things that they drop there, and just like I said, some of those older things that we've since kind of moved away from. But it's also done to a very minor degree. And also, as kids from that time, we know, like, yeah, that's kind of how kids talked back then.
Sure.
It wasn't great.
Right.
A number of things where you just kind of said it because other people said it and not think about it. And you grow up and you're like, oh, that was very derogatory. We should not have said that to those people. Right. But again, it was like is a time before we advanced. So, but it's nice to reflect and know that we have come a certain way, and be able to say, like, we've talked about this before, some of the 90s films, like it's a little rough at times, sure, but it's also the fact that it's rough means we've come a long way. So good for us,
Yeah. I didn't give it much mind. I mean, I'm glad that we've grown as
pretty
a
minor.
society, but this was a brief window into an earlier age. But more than that, it kind of was a dividing line. You're not wrong. Like, as much as there were kids that liked Monster Squad or liked Goonies, I knew kids that were like the Goonies or like the Monster Squad. Like, I knew underage kids that smoked cigarettes and swore and had Playboys stashed in the woods and all the things that would encapsulate the Monster Squad type of kids. But then I also knew the innocent kids that would slide down hills on cardboard and build tree forts and stuff like that too. So, it was kind of an interesting thing to go visit the other cool kids of the Monster Squad and not so much the L7 square kids of the Goonies. But there is a lot of crossover between these two films.
Yeah, definitely. So the other thing I will say about this film as well, and I think it's one of the reasons that I gravitated towards this film when I was younger, when I kind of reflect back on it, which is, and I may have mentioned this at an end of last episode or something, but like, I was actually not one of those kids that loved horror movies. I was actually kind of sensitive to some of the stuff that I watched when I was younger, and horror movies really scared me. To this day, I have a very, very graphic recurring nightmare about it's a mashup nightmare of Gremlins and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles that I got from not even watching the movie Gremlins, but rather watching a short clip on Siskel and Ebert when they were reviewing Gremlins 2, right?
Okay.
And so, like, even seeing the box art for Dead Alive, where it had like the skull underneath with like chick like tearing apart, that would kind of creep me out. And so I was just like, I don't think I like these movies.
Right.
And so, but every now and then you would get these sort of like PG-13 films that dabbled close to horror without really like diving into some of the more extreme aspects of the genre.
Yes.
And I loved the shit out of those. And so I really think that was also one of the appealing aspects of this film for me growing up, is that it wasn't something that I was too terrified of. It like wasn't super gory. It sort of keeps a very lighthearted tone throughout. Never really gets super sinister. It's not Hellraiser where like people's skin are being pulled apart and all this like super graphic gross stuff that I didn't
Which,
like.
by the way,
So-
the 80s when we were growing up was rife, or in early 90s was rife with all of that. Candyman. And,
Yeah.
I mean, that was
that's like the golden
Freddy
era of
Krueger
like
and-
horror films right now, right?
And I'm glad I got to go back in the 90s during the 5 movies for 5 days for $5 days and bone up on all those
Blockbuster.
things. Yeah, when I got my courage up to go see those things when I got a little older. But you're right. When I was just a wee lad, these were the kinds of films that spoke to me. So I'm with you on all those things. I just, for whatever reason, never got around to Monster Squad. In all fairness, a lot of people didn't. This wasn't a very widely distributed film, and we're going to get into all of that. It didn't do a lot of success in the box office. This was something that kind of came around later. I'm glad you found it at an early age, but this was not... I don't remember this even being a box art film. I know we talk about box art films a lot on this show, where you remember, the cover of the film on the VHS, whatever, like when you go to the video store, sometimes that drew you to rent the film. Other times you just straight remember the box art. Fright Night is one of those. Creep Show is one of those. Evil Dead 2 is one of those. Like I
was going to say, Evil Dead 2 is the number one with the bullet that always sticks out with the skull with the eyes looking at you.
Yeah. House with the little hand in the door, the little finger in the doorbell, Yeah. There's a few of those that will always be with me, but I don't ever remember seeing this in the video store. Until it became a cult hit and got the notoriety that we have with it now. And then it was one of those movies that I always heard about. But now, it got to a point where I was like too old. I was still exploring. I had moved on past Monster Squad phase. I was trying to explore, other things. And so I never really had the reason or the excuse to go back and visit this film until now. And so it was fun, man. This was a good one to just kind of throw on the nostalgia goggles, like you're saying, and take a trip back into time and just go be a kid again for a brisk hour and a half or something. Like it was a really short film.
It's 82 minutes. It's an hour 22, and that's with credits. And I don't know if you caught this. They actually slowed down the credits so that they're slower than usual to take longer.
Take it all in.
It was such a short film.
Take it all in. Yep, absolutely.
And speaking of sort of old school nostalgia glasses, it starts off with what I believe is both of our, if not all-time favorites, certainly up there, of the movie studio logo title cards, which is the good old TriStar logo.
Oh, yeah.
With the Pegasus.
Oh, dude, it's fantastic. Yeah.
So starts off with that guy.
I think we brought that up this season for RoboCop, because that was an Orion picture.
Yes.
My two favorites are always going to be Orion and TriStar.
Those are the two. Same, yeah. And then I'm sure we've mentioned too about the old HBO intro with all the models. That's another classic one that'll always
that's
remember.
fire. Yeah. They could have made that 20 minutes and I would still go back and watch that. Yeah. I love that. Flying through the miniature city, landscape and all of that.
Yeah, man. Back in the days of good old practical effects. Jesus, if anybody under the age of 26 was listening, they are not anymore. They're like, hold on, let me get you your rocking chair, Gramps.
Pepperidge Farm, remember?
Blockbuster.
Do you remember the HBO intro?
I remember.
That was when we could get the bunny ears straight to get the picture to come in clearly.
Back when VCRs had tracking, you had to push the buttons up and down.
I love that it's always a Southern gentleman that remembers these things. Yeah.
What are you gonna do? Like the old, grizzled, New York guy, yeah, I remember those times. That was hard.
It was hard times. Yeah,
you had to do the tracking. And so often you didn't know if it was up or down. You didn't even know what tracking was. You just knew you had to hold the button.
Some days I had to decide between HBO and cigarettes, but I always chose HBO.
If you wanted to steal cable, it wasn't a whole to-do. You gave your guy $50 and it was done. Now, when the film starts off, we actually get a nice text crawl, and that explains kind of what's going on here. I'll read it for you verbatim here real quick. 100 years before this story begins, it was a time of darkness in Transylvania, a time when Dr. Abraham Van Helsing and a small band of freedom fighters conspired to rid the world of vampires and monsters, and to save mankind from the forces of eternal evil. ... They blew it. Which is exactly what you would expect, like a young 20-something screenwriter to start off their screenplay with.
Yep.
Now, after that, we actually open on a pretty cool foreboding shot of a Grim Reaper statue in a graveyard. The credits start to crawl. We've got lightning striking. We've got this eerie music that's sort of playing. And the camera dollies through this graveyard, brings us to Dracula's castle, through the crypt, past coffins and spiders, to a large bat that is hanging upside down, which I think was just a very cool practical effect, and one of many that we'll see through the entirety of this film. But the introduction to Dracula as this bat hanging upside down, and then he drops to the ground. We get a quick cut of a hand and then a reveal that it's our Mr. Dracula. And outside of the castle, we've got Van Helsing and his team of people who are approaching. They blow open the doors and get the first glimpse of one of the brides of Dracula, who I think are very well done. They're very simple, very effective, but super creepy. And she's basically sitting there like eating a rat with like blood dripping down her mouth, and gets a stake through the heart with a crossbow. And then there's this gleaming amulet. Girl's brought out to recite an incantation, at which point the ground splits up, skeletons pop out, this vortex opens as she finishes, and everyone gets sucked in before we jump to the present day, which of course at the time of filming is 1987. Now, Ryan, as someone who's just come into this film without having seen it before, a Monster Squad virgin, if you will, how did that opening strike you? Like, did you, did it work for you? Did you like it? Was it indicative, or did you think it was going to take a while to get going? How did that welcome you to the world of the Monster Squad?
No, I mean, that was fantastic because, and we've talked about this plenty already in this episode, and I think in the last episode we announced this film. But I always kind of pass this off as a Kirkland brand Goonies. And I thought right out the gate, we're establishing this as something different, because Goonies didn't have monsters aside from sloth. It was more of an adventure tale. They're following a pirate map, a treasure map the whole time. And it leads them through the sewers and caves and booby traps and all these things. And they're being chased by a ragtag group of, bank robbers or criminals or whatever. But this is different. Like, we're going right into Dracula, Van Helsing. I've also just watched recently Bram Stoker's Dracula that I did for the mini reviews. So,
right.
I was kind of in that Dracula mindset, and I thought it was dope,
Dr. Acula.
Yeah. But I did appreciate that, as much as this gets passed off as like, Goonies, like we talked about it already, Goonies, this and that, it's separating itself right out the gate. And I think that's an unfair comparison. Now, there is a lot of overlap in other ways with the ragtag group of kids in general. And we're going to get to that here very shortly. But I thought it was dope the way they did that and kind of gave us some context.
Absolutely. And the other thing that I think that it does well is it kind of establishes that we're going to be playing within a realm that's already been sort of pre-established, right?
Sure.
And it's just going to maybe take some of these, like, it's not a radical new reinvention of any of these monsters. These classic universal monsters that are going to pop up over the course of the film still retain all of their original qualities. They have been given a nice 1980s veneer, which Stan Winston and his team crushed it. We'll get into that. But again, it's playing within the pre-established universe and Van Helsing and everything else that goes along with that. And even though it doesn't go into any of the lore too deep, it does a good job of adhering to what's there.
But I think it. Like, the deal. So it's really easy to dip in and out of this story and just kind of establish it really quickly and then get right to modern day. It didn't beat you over the head with it. It wasn't ham-fisted. It was just enough to say once upon a time, and we get into it, and then we're right into modern day. So because we're using established characters and established lore, they could kind of dot their way through it, and it worked fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Now from there, like I said, we have jumped to the present day, and we meet the first two of our kids anyways, and that is going to be Sean and Patrick. And Sean is pretty much the leader of this group, and he is going to be our protagonist throughout the course of the film, though the others are going to be given a good enough amount of screen time. Probably, I would say, of the rest of them, Rudy probably dominates the most, and then Patrick after that, and then we've got a couple of the other ones that'll pop up. But it does a good job, and Horace, of course, but it does a good job of sort of giving all of them enough screen time to where we do believe that they're a squad, right? Like they are sold as. So the first of these two characters are in the principal's office. They're being talked to because in science class, they were drawing monsters when they should have been paying attention. We've got your sort of, that classic 80s principal who's trying to be cool and meet the kids on their level, but just ends up being super lame, and the kids end up scoffing at him, by which, of course, by extension, we as the audience end up scoffing at him. And it does a very good job immediately of dropping you into these kids' shoes and kind of letting you know that's the experience and viewpoint that we're going to tell this story through and experience this story through. We also very quickly meet Horace, who is going to be known throughout much of the movie as simply Fat Kid, which again is one of those things that probably wouldn't be done if this film were made today in 2022. And we also get Rudy, who definitely would not be characterized the way that he is, because he's basically a 22-year-old living in a 13-year-old's body. Instead of having a, Harley Davidson or a motorcycle, he's got one of those cool bikes with the spokes on the back. But yeah, he shows up, screeches onto campus smoking a cigarette, and when his buddy Horace is being punked around by who I believe is the jerky brother from the Wonder Years.
It was?
And yeah, I have no idea what his name is, but recognize his face all day long.
I think his name is Jason Hervey. He's the resident bully in all movies back in the 80s. He's who he hired.
Jasons always have the most punchable faces, man. I don't know what it is. It's always just these blonde punchable faces with the Jasons.
Yep.
And, we're introduced to him when he's punking around Horace, slaps his Snicker bar out of his hands. Rudy shows up, and the kid actually, stepped on it with his shoe. Rudy shows up, makes him eat it, and everyone kind of, laughs and mocks him. Now, when they're walking home, we've got the two kids, Sean and Patrick. They're joined by Sean's little sister, Phoebe, who's actually going to factor into the film quite a bit before it's over. And they pass what is known as Scary German Guy's house. Now, Ryan, one thing that also did kind of make me laugh just with regards to some of the more unsavory elements is they went with German. Here in 2022, you can still have Scary German Guy, and that's okay. If they had gone with Scary Persian Guy or something, it'd probably just be rife with offensive stereotypes, right? Scary Indian Guy, with any of those things, right? Scary Asian Guy. You got Mickey Rooney doing his
can't do that
offensive thing. Yeah, no. So, but Scary German Guy, and he actually is played very well by an older gentleman whose name I did not bother to look up. My apologies, older gentleman. If you're out there listening, I assume you are.
Leonardo Cimino is his name.
Ryan, I'm so glad I have you here for these things, right?
Yep.
At least one of us is responsible.
Which doesn't sound German at all, by the way.
It's just hardcore Italian and really good at accents.
Yes. It's me, Mr. Scary German Guy. It's oh boy.
Yeah, that's
we
hilarious.
didn't know. We couldn't travel internationally in the 80s. We didn't know any better. He's European. German.
Yeah,
fine.
Absolutely.
Done.
No, totally works. And honestly, I think, reflecting on it for a moment, I'm sure it was reverse engineered from the standpoint of, I believe Van Helsing is originally German. I believe his journals are German. And so I'm sure they just stuck with
that. They needed a through point to get to that lore, like you were saying earlier.
Yeah.
This part of the film,
the Van Helsing text.
This part of the film too was it reminded me of the Sandlot and James Earl Jones's house, the abandoned, scary house that the kids always avoided. I feel like there's one of those in every one of these kind of movies. You know what I mean? There's always that stereotypical house that kids would avoid because it's dilapidated or run down. And then, of course, kids start to share stories about who lives there and what's going on. And it builds up its own tradition. And this was no different. So
yeah. Now we're going to go ahead and jump into all of the obvious things about this film in a minute. Things like all the makeup effects, the costume, direction, all of this. But the first thing I want to talk about is one of the last things that I usually talk about, and that's the score. Now, maybe this is because I've seen this movie so many times, dozens and dozens of times, that it kind of frees me up to pay more attention to something like the score that I'm usually not paying as close attention to. But it was on this viewing, and it had been a couple of years since I'd seen the movie. I think I make a point, probably one. I think I make a point to watch it every year or so, every couple of years at least. I noticed how integral the score was to a lot of what's going on. And even down to the standpoint that, this is clearly one of those scores where, they're watching and they're doing a live orchestral performance and really punctuating a lot of what's going on screen, because the film dabbles very, very well, I would say, in a very balanced way between being a sort of kid's adventure and a horror film. And so you could imagine that it might be kind of difficult musically to come up with a number of cues that effectively play both sides without going too strong one way or the other, right? And so I thought this film did a really good job, the score that is, of establishing it as a kid's film, but also making the scary parts seem scary. There's also a couple resonant moments that the score punctuates, like at the very end when Horace finally gets his moment and cocks the shotgun and he's like, my name is Horace. And there's like this little da-da-da, right? These little like sound cues. So the score's really effective at, and then of course, you know, when it's the 80s montage, it's that like super rockin' 80s style beat. So just really, really impressed, like I said, with the score overall. Again, I don't know if this is something that jumped out because I've seen the film a lot, but
I totally noticed it too. I'm going to go one step further and say that as I was researching the players of this film to see, because I'm always curious, right? When you go back to some of these older nostalgia movies, like who went on to go do other things. And so obviously we'll talk about Fred Dekker in a moment. And of course, we all know Shane Black. We're going to talk about him too. But this, since you brought up the music, it's done by a guy named Bruce Broughton. I think I'm maybe pronouncing that right.
Yep,
Hopefully,
that's what I had.
And I don't know if you went through his credits, but he's acted as a composer and did additional music for a lot of Disney and Pixar stuff.
Yeah.
Namely Monsters, Inc., Fantasia 2000, A Bug's Life. He did this score for Tombstone. He did the theme music for Tiny Toon Adventures and Dinosaurs, the Jim Henson vehicle, Disney Jim Henson vehicle from TGIF back in the day. He acted as a conductor for Tales from the Crypt. I mean, this guy went on and did a lot of stuff. Harry and the Hendersons. So I Married an Axe Murderer. So yeah, I mean, he's
and you're forgetting the all-time classic Baby's Day Out, sir. His magnum opus, Baby's Day Out.
How could I forget? Yeah, he didn't compose all those, but he did act as conductor or additional music. Some of those he did compose. But yeah, if you go look him up on IMDb, he's got a really good list of films there.
Absolutely, yeah. So big props to Bruce Broughton, and he brought a lot of energy to this film that I think really worked. Now, when we get back to the film, we've got some pilots flying a cargo plane, which, by the way, one of them has the most Miami Beach cocaine cowboy Kenny Loggins look I've ever seen. I just adore it, right? And
keeping it smooth.
Absolutely. We've got the other pilot, there's two co-pilots, and one of them goes back into the cargo bay. I think they hear a noise or something like that, and they go to investigate. We've got some deep red light back there, and there's some bats flying around that very quickly turn into Dracula. So, the pilot panics, ends up throwing a hatch that would, open the floor beneath Count Dracula. I'm assuming, the idea being that he would fall down to his death. But, of course, being Dracula, he can fly. So dude opens the hatch. Dracula stays there floating, giving him some fuck you eyes along the way. But the cargo, which is a coffin, that itself departs and flies all the way to the ground. And actually must have been a hell of a coffin because it survives a very, very long drop into a swamp where it remains. And that's going to come up here in just a little bit. Now, we've been introduced to Rudy. He's the guy who protected Horace, the badass. I believe at this point he's just swigging beer inside the treehouse, right? Because, again, that's what you did in the 80s. No, he's the cool kid. He's 13 already. Of course he's going to be drinking beer in a treehouse.
And, come on, in Goonies, you had Josh Brolin's character who kind of played that role as the older brother to a certain degree, but he was never smoking cigarettes and drinking beer and, looking at boobs and all these things. He just played an older brother, a more experienced teen. Whereas this kid shoved all in. This kid more reminded me of the Eddie character from Stranger Things, which I don't think you've seen, but famously Eddie sacrifices himself in the latest rendition of Stranger Things while playing Metallica riff. I believe it was Ride the Lightning, but anyways,
I think it's Master of Puppets, if I recall correctly.
Master of Puppets. Yes, it was Master of Puppets. I stand corrected. I must be wearing orthopedic shoes. So... Yeah, that's what this reminded me of, was like that style, more of an Eddie style character that still hung out with the kids, maybe a couple years older, going through some changes. But they're still out hunting monsters together, even though he's looking at boobies and smoking some stogies.
Absolutely. And we find out that mom has gotten a journal from a local garage sale or something like that. I don't really explain where she got it, but either way, it ends up being Van Helsing's journal, which apparently is just the type of thing that you can find laying around at a garage sale. But it's written in German, so she gives it to her kid because she knows he likes the monster stuff, but he can't read it quite yet. Wonder if there's anybody that could read German that we've been introduced to yet. Might help out.
Maybe
in this situation.
It's Leonardo Cimino.
Now the other
acclaimed German. Real quick, I just want to interject it. Did you notice that the mom literally is the same mom from the Goonies? Mary Ellen Trainor.
Oh, no, I didn't. Go figure. Yeah. How about that? But yeah, no, I can totally see it. Now, we also, besides the mom as well, we also meet the dad. Now, dad is kind of, again, another sort of a 80s stereotype here where he's the cop who's addicted to the job. Just as much as he's addicted to cigarettes, actually. That motherfucker is chain smoking the entire film.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's one of those
he and Rudy must be like bumming them off each other all the time. I had a joke. Kept thinking about that and laughing to myself. I'm like, I wonder if they bum cigarettes off each other.
Right.
Hey, kids, you gotta like. I have in my notes here that he's Kirkland brand Eric Roberts. He looked just like Eric Roberts to me every time he came on
that's
screen.
Funny.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, you know what's funny is to me, I actually thought that he was a Kirkland brand Craig T. Nelson. I could have seen Craig T. Nelson in that role, much like Poltergeist. You know, the just sort of tired suburban father, right?
In the role, yes, but he had the hair and the face and the look of Eric Roberts.
He didn't really
look.
Yeah, no, he looked more like Eric Roberts, but in terms of just like the physicality and the way that he played the character and all of that.
Yep.
I also just love, it's so funny to remember that as recently as 30 years ago, sitting down on your bedroom bed and lighting up a cigarette and then grabbing your kid and dropping him on your lap and telling him a story with that cigarette smoke just sitting there fucking blowing in his face all day long. Nobody cared. Perfectly acceptable. Yeah. Nobody ever thought twice about it. Hey, you got 7
was
kids.
The smoking section.
You got 7 kids in the car. Roll them windows up and light it up. Nobody cares. Don't even need to throw a seatbelt on them either. Just make sure they make it to church okay.
Hey, man, I had 7 kids because I thought I might lose 2 or 3. You know, like shit happens. Moving on.
Absolutely. And with this father figure, by the way, he is actually, we're introduced to them, some marital problems, a little bit of marital strife in the house there. They're actually
He has a line at one point that says, "Honey, I'm a cop, okay?" And I have that written in quotes. I have no idea what context it was. I just remember knowing that line was hilarious to me.
I think it's right there when I think it's right around here because they're supposed to go to marriage counseling. It's right there in my notes.
Yeah, so it's around this time.
Yeah, they're supposed to go to marriage counseling, and he gets called because there's been a break-in at the museum, and he's like, "Honey, I've my job's important," and she's like, "I'm important," and then he like looks at her, and he's like, "I'll see you later," or whatever the line you just said is. I've got a job.
Honey, I'm a cop, okay?
Yeah, exactly. Right?
Like that just writes off neglect. Yeah, no big deal. That's gonna go over great in today's environment. Good luck.
Now, one thing I will say about this film that I think we've sort of been established to already, even without the monsters being like all of them being formally introduced, is already we're seeing that the film has a very sort of breakneck pace, and especially with regards to the direction. You know, it's shot and it's presented in a little bit more of an elevated fashion than maybe your standard family-friendly kids fare might be. I'm talking about the fact that there's a ton of dolly movement in this, you know? Rarely is the camera just sort of stationary. It's always sort of pushing in or pushing through, booming, craning around a little bit in very sort of subtle ways. Now, he does also use a lot of master shots. One of the funny things, actually, I'll do a quick aside here. By the way, I will say this. So I ended up watching a bare bones release of this film, and there is pretty much no information available online. There's a handful of deleted scenes that you can see on YouTube that really didn't affect the film whatsoever. They're 30 to 45 second shots that actually should have been taken out because they just slowed the film down without adding anything. However, it turns out that there was a special edition Blu-ray that came out on its 30th anniversary or perhaps 25th, and this thing is loaded with stuff, which is to say that it has apparently like a 4 to 6 part documentary on there, and not one but 2 audio commentaries. And this is normally the type of thing where for this program, especially in our third season now, I would have gotten that DVD and I would have like torn into it, man. And I would have listened to all of it and I'd be talking about a lot of it right now. That is not available as a new media. Like you can't buy a new copy of that. And so the one that was available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and all of this and any of them, they were all $50 brand new. And I just was not going to spend $50 on this Blu-ray. And they actually have them. You can find it for $10 used on eBay. And I would have loved to have done that, but it was going to take a couple weeks to get here. So I wouldn't have had enough time to have ordered it, brought it in, and also digested it in time for us to be recording here. So
Jason, you know what I'm hearing right now?
A lot of excuses.
A lot of excuses, buddy. A lot of excuses. Tighten up.
I know it.
Get your shit together.
I'm just saying, dude, like I've been able to like bring the anecdotes and a lot of information to a lot of those episodes because I do seek them out. And as long as something's been available, I've been able to get my hands on it. And especially when it's a Criterion film, you know, there's a ton of content out there. I really regret that I wasn't able to do that on a film that I loved so much, right? Like I would have just eaten that up. Instead, what I did is I watched this documentary called Wolfman's Got Nards, which for anybody listening, if you haven't watched it, don't bother. It's really not very engaging, and it's not really that interesting. It's a lot of member berries and nostalgia glasses. The entire film is 90 minutes of, hey, did you like Monster Squad growing up? I sure did. Did you like Frankenstein? Yeah, I remember Frankenstein. Wow, wasn't it cool? Wolfman's Got Nards. Yeah, Wolfman's Got Nards. And then they'd be like, here's the entire team of people that Stan Winston hired. And this dude made the fish costume and this guy made Dracula. And you're like, okay, sweet. All right, we're going to get into it here. They're like, but you don't want to know about any of that. Here's some more people talking about how much they love the film. And you're like, no, I actually would have loved to have heard from those guys. And so there were just, I feel like there's a lot more stories about the film that are out there that I didn't get a chance to come across for one reason or another. And I regret that, not just because I'd be able to present them here, but because I'd like to know these things about, my absolute favorite film growing up. It's too bad.
That's a real shame too. I did not see Wolfman's Got Nards because you told me not to bother, but that is, I'm sure you saw this, but it's directed by the Sean character, the main kid of this film, Monster Squad. So when you have someone on the inside doing it, you'd expect a little more inside information, but I guess he just wanted to keep it on the surface level and, talk about the impact of it on culture more than he wanted to talk about the making of the film itself, is all I could really take from it. But, which it sounds like he did cover that, and it's fun in that regard. It's a fun romp, but it's not going to lend itself to, this podcast very well.
Yeah, or like I said, I'm sure that, listening to 2 audio commentaries from Fred Decker is going to glean a lot more.
Would have loved to have heard those.
That documentary itself. So, but the one thing I will say though, the one very interesting takeaway from Wolfman's Got Nards is that Fred Decker, so this film, back up a little bit. This film was a huge disappointment. It didn't even crack the top 10 the weekend that it came out. And that just spells death for any film. Now, the one thing that they do say is that just 2 weeks prior, The Lost Boys came out. And so they do feel, even though it was an R-rated film, they do feel like The Lost Boys stole a lot of that thunder that maybe they could have had if that film hadn't come out, because it was a huge hit. People were still going to check that out. So instead of going to see The Monster Squad, people were still going out to see The Lost Boys. And so the film failed. It was Fred Decker's second film, I believe, after Night of the Creeps, which was his first. And he actually was kind of on a trajectory where he was kind of going to be a Hollywood director. He was friends with Shane Black. They kind of came up a little bit together. And so when this film came out and bombed, it effectively ended his career for some time. Now, you have to remember that this is pre-internet, right? And so there's really no way for Fred Decker to know that for the ensuing 10, 15, 20 years, it turns out that a lot of people are actually getting exposed to this film and coming to like it, to the point that it's becoming a bit of a cult film. So when the lead actor, the Sean character, I believe Andre Gower is his name, when he actually reached out to Fred Decker 20 years after the movie was released to let him know, like, hey, I'm doing this documentary, would love for you to be a part of it. Like, all these people love the film. He didn't even want to partake in it because he had a very hard time with the reaction of this film. Like, he put his heart and soul into it. He knew it was a good film, and not only did it not do well, but it also prevented him from making films moving forward. So you can tell that this is a guy who has gone to like a lot of psychotherapy to sort of deal with what this all means about his future and why did this happen and how come people didn't like it and da-da-da. So, kind of think of it like the woman that you love, like the woman of your dreams, the woman you were going to spend your entire life with, like dumps you and just bails for 20 years. And you've gone through all these psychotherapy sessions and, you finally come to terms with it after a lot of really difficult work. And then all of a sudden she pops up and she's like, hey, what's up? I know it's been 20 years and I bailed on you, but you want to get back together again? And it's like, no. What do you want to know? No, where were you 10, 15, 20 years ago? Like, I put so much work into moving on from you and now you just show up? And that's very much kind of the metaphor that I would use in terms of how I perceived Fred Decker's reaction to this film, because people came up to him and he was just like, look, I'm sorry. Like, I don't have fond memories of this film. Like, this was a very, very difficult situation for me and it took a long time to get over. So as much as I would love to, hey, yeah, it's great that everyone loves it. Like, I can't just be that way about this film. So it's a very conflicted response that he has. And that's evident throughout the course of the documentary. So that was the one aspect of the film that I thought was really interesting, was seeing Fred Decker kind of have this reckoning of the fact that people did come to love this film and it was everything that he thought it was, but circumstances made it seem as though it wasn't, and the technology at the time prevented him from being able to go along on that journey of seeing people grow to love it, So that in and of itself was super interesting.
I wonder how much money it's made since then, because we haven't talked about this. This was made on a budget of $12 million, which is pretty incredible to me. I guess most of that must have gone to Stan Winston and a lot of the effects design and creatures and stuff. But
totally,
I don't know where else it would have gone to other than the camera movement you're discussing. 12 million is a decent amount.
That's
for
a good amount at the time,
and this short,
and they were able to
for
get
an hour
the,
and 20 minutes.
Yeah, and then of course, they have the obvious product placement, right? So like, I mean, they have Burger King was a sponsor for this film. So obviously it was supposed to be like a big hit,
But it only brought in 3.8 million. So it didn't even make 30% of its money back. That is rough. And I watched some stuff on this film, and some of the research that I did credited a lot of the lack of success of this film as well in the fact that nobody knew how to market it, because it was like too childish to be a teen movie and too grown up to be a kid's movie. So that demographic didn't really exist back then. The PG-13 rating was like brand spanking new. So everybody was learning how to adapt to that. So where you have The Lost Boys, that is a easier movie to market because, okay, we're going, R rating, whatever. We're going to go a little more edgy with it. The sharp teeth, it'll be a little darker, a little more violent. And you have Goonies. It's like way on the other side. That's a kid's movie, PG, totally safe. Steven Spielberg, blah, blah, blah. We're going to go on this fun romp. But this kind of like tried to straddle both those. And I think that market definitely existed just 5, 6, 7 years later when we got into the 90s and got into, movies that were catering more to the early teens and stuff. And we were okay with some of these things. But I think that because I heard that like some of the marketing was marketed to really young kids and stuff. Some of it was marketed in more of an adult fashion, but because of that, like it never really found a true audience. Like it was really split down the middle.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of the marketing campaigns, one of the things that they talked about is like, again, just going back to the 80s and sort of like the inappropriateness and not just not knowing, is they actually had a pretty fun marketing campaign where they would show each of the monsters in like a wanted poster, right?
I saw that. Yeah.
Did you see the one for the Mummy?
I saw them all. Yeah.
Literally one of the jokes that they make, because it's basically like, Dracula, wanted, theft of 7 pints of blood, right? Grand theft, biting or something, right? Like they would always try to do these like little puns on things, right? For the Mummy, one of the things they went with in this huge national public marketing campaign, the Mummy wanted statutory rap.
Jesus.
Like, can you imagine seeing that on a billboard in downtown Los Angeles right now?
Oh, man.
Holy
Yeah.
shit, man. That was like, wow. Again, certain things just kind of remind you, like, these were very different times with what you
I'm looking at it right
say.
now. The Dracula one is it's got his mugshot. It says wanted, felony biting, unlawful blood sucking, assault, and battery. Eyes bloodshot, complexion deathly pale.
Yeah.
and it's not even the same actor that they used in the fucking movie. So like they didn't even try. They were just like throwing shit at the wall to see what stuck. It's so stupid. Yeah.
Yeah, because what's funny is on the initial poster, you also see where they're trying to go for a different messaging, where they were trying to piggyback off of Ghostbusters.
You saw that too. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's like, you know who to call when they've got ghosts, but who do you call when you've got monsters, right? So yeah, you just see them kind of throwing darts like, what's a comp here that we can go with, you know? Like, well, we got Ghostbusters.
Nothing.
Well, we got this. Well, we got Goonies. And like, but it was such an incoherent marketing campaign that you'd have to imagine no one really knew what they were showing up for.
Right. Yeah. And then, like you said, put that on the heels of movies that actually did work, and then it never really found its audience. And that's really a shame.
Fred Decker would only go on to direct one other film, and that's a RoboCop 3. Not a good one. Not a good one at all. But getting back to the film, this is where things really kick off with the monsters. We've got a shot of a police precinct. A man runs in there. He's very frantic. He's demanding to be locked up on account of being a werewolf. He keeps screaming, I'm a werewolf. I'm a werewolf. Now he gets
lock me up.
Yeah, lock me up. Bam, bam, bam. And then he gets shot. A really actually intense scene. Again, some of these scenes, it's easy to take for granted. They're like, this is a kid's movie, right? Like that scene isolated in a different film is very intense and probably belongs in an R-rated film, even though it's not gory.
Yeah, but like all through this film, that werewolf guy in human form does nothing but scream orders at everybody and requests. I have in my notes here, maybe he tries not yelling. Like, I don't know, just ask for stuff. Because there's like, he calls the dad at one point later in the film, and he's like, your kid's going to die. He's got your kid.
Yeah,
I'm like, oh my God.
Very threatening.
Dude.
It sounds like you're threatening him.
Like, take a breath.
Doesn't sound like a warning.
Chill. Let's start with this. Who are you?
Yeah.
So I thought maybe he just eats the, chill. Like a little bit of sugar attracts more flies than vinegar, or whatever the saying is,
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is really where that breakneck pace kind of starts to kick in. So we've got, at the museum, we find out that the mummy is missing. Then we cut to a shot where we're in the ambulance. The man who was claiming to be a werewolf, who was just shot, wakes up as the wolf man and attacks the driver in a very Twilight Zone, the movie type of shot, like at the very beginning, very reminiscent of that. And we've got also Dracula from there, who meets all the monsters at the swamp. Now, the only creatures that we haven't really been introduced yet to are the remaining two, which is who I will call the creature from the Black Lagoon, classic Universal monster, who finds the coffin in the swamp and ends up hoisting it and chucking it out. And it turns out that the coffin actually contains Frankenstein's monster. That's actually the target that Dracula has been trying to get to the entire time. Now, I have to say, Ryan, this is the one. I mean, there's several kind of cheesy moments in the film for sure. Again, it's a kid's film, but this is the one truly like Batman TV show moment where it's like, how are we going to wake up Frankenstein? I know. I'll pull these electric shock absorbers out of my cane. And it's like, that's probably like that cane has been building up to this moment its entire life. You have never had a use for those two little electric shock absorbers, shock things. But right now, to wake up Frankenstein, they are here. And the inexplicable reason why your walking cane has electrical currents flowing through it has just finally paid off.
Yep, he's been charging that thing for millennia.
One day, my precious, one day.
Yeah, right.
He's more stoked about that than finding Frankenstein. It's like, dude, I paid $700 for that damn thing. It's about time it paid off. So it's a lightning storm. He's able to use it to wake up Frankenstein. We also get a very funny sequence immediately after that of the youngest kid in the Monster Squad. His name is Eugene. And he goes and he tells his dad that there's a monster in his closet. And the dad's being very dismissive, and he just kind of like walks around the room. He's like, okay, let's see what's here. And he like throws it open, but he's like looking at the kid, and he's like, ooh, there's a scary monster back there, in a very mocking fashion, except there actually is. And the mummy's back there and like raises his hand and like reaches out to the kid. And
that was a cool ass looking mummy too.
It really was. Yeah. And that actually brings up a good point, Ryan, because arguably the selling feature of this movie, aside from the sort of, kids in a pack if you're younger, is the bringing back of the 5 heavy hitters of Universal monsters, right? That's Frankenstein, Dracula, the Wolfman, the Mummy, and the Creature from the Black Lagoon. All of them are brought back for this film and given updated makeup and effects, and everything is practical. So tell me about that, Ryan. Did all that work for you? Was that what you loved most about the film? And
yes.
And which of the creatures did you like the most? Talk a little bit about that.
The Mummy especially was fantastic. Gilman was great too. I loved Gilman, Creature from the Black Lagoon. I'm assuming they switched his name to Gilman because Creature from the Black Lagoon is a mouthful, and they had to like have something to roll call him off with, as the movie went along. So Dracula, I thought, left a little bit to be desired. I thought that. Yeah, I mean, he was just a little too regal, I guess. It would have been nice to have seen him be more of a monster, and he was more of a polished gentleman. And I know, that the classic Universal monster version of him was somewhat like that, but yeah, he just kind of came off as like debonair and, I'm Dracula, blah, blah, blah. I don't know.
See, for me, I thought he was more of like a. I thought he was more of like a.
It wasn't fun.
See, I thought it was because I thought it was like a Patrick Bateman. Like I feel like he plays him like he's like a straight psychopath,
Okay.
But not in that like crazed like Tuco from Breaking Bad, like blah, right sort of way. Like it's that like controlled, harnessed like. Like he can look into your soul and be like, oh, dude, that man would physically eat raw flesh. Yes, he would absolutely eat raw flesh. He is that type of person, right? He is a true sociopath.
See, I didn't really get that from him. I would have liked to have seen more of that. Yeah. I mean, I could tell he was going for like more of a Bela Lugosi style, kind of suave ladies man, draws his prey in and all of that by being charming. But a little creepy too. But then, I just kind of felt like it just seemed like I never really felt threatened by him. I think that's what I'm trying to say. I never really felt like he was a threat. I didn't get the Patrick Bateman reference that you're going with.
Interesting. I mean, he does pick up an 8-year-old girl by the chin and stare at her in the eyes and call her a bitch, which is pretty crazy.
I have that in my notes. That seems like a bit much. Yeah, that was a bit
so
much.
So I would say that
me.
he's probably a bit of a psychopath and sociopath based on that moment. But I do understand what you're saying as well. And that could also be a function of the screenplay as well. If they had given him a little bit more opportunities to really show that, because again, I do think that he imbued that sensibility, and in watching the documentary, I can also say that that's what he was going for. He was trying to do that. He wanted him to be very sort of sinister and psychopathic.
More of a Hannibal Lecter style serial killer type vibe. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, because like it's unfair because all the other monsters, like werewolf inherently is this violent ball of rage, and so we get to see that threat. Mummy is just falling apart, dead corpse, and all the grossness and all of that. Gilman, very much the same. Frankenstein isn't meant to be threatening as he is, befriends the kids. We're going to get to that next. That's kind of the next scene. As he moves along, he ends up being more like Sloth from the Goonies.
Yeah.
More of hey, you guys kind of, mentality. And, is more of a simpleton beast. In the way that he was in the films too, misunderstood and all of the things, he's a monster, pitchforks and torches, and he just wants to be loved. So that's Frankenstein's character arc. But then Dracula never really, as someone that's dressed in a cape and the regal Bela Lugosi style outfit, the classic Universal monster style Dracula with the slick back hair, unless you see him physically like show his teeth and his eyes get all wide in a Nosferatu kind of way, you are just left with a debonair, suave gentleman that we know is Dracula, but never really establishes himself as such. And that, yes, he calls an 8-year-old a bitch as he holds her up and stuff. And so by the end, he does get his redemption as a villain. But he just kind of seems like more of a brainiac mastermind of this whole plotting and scheming, using these other monsters as his henchmen, more or less, to do his bidding. But I would have liked to have seen a little more like threatening stuff. Like, you know, as those people are going about doing his thing, maybe they come in and they see like some dead corpses in the background that he's recently drained for sustenance because he was hungry, and maybe wipes his chin. He's like, yes, I needed a snack or something like that. Like, it would have been nice to see, even in a kid's movie, in an innocent way, just a little wink and a nod to some Dracula shit other than just the bat stuff, you know?
Yeah. No. You're absolutely right. And I'll touch on that here in just a moment after I talk about this part where the kids do agree to finally fight Dracula. And that's where we get the reveal of scary German guy. And wouldn't you know it, he's really not as scary as it seems. Though there is a nice little moment where
or as German as he seems.
Would you like some pie? But there is a nice little moment where they do play with that, where he shows up and he's like got the knife and he looks menacing, and then it turns out that the knife is there to cut some pie for the children, and he serves them pie and Pepsi, and he's actually a super cool guy. He also speaks German, so he's able to translate the Van Helsing diary, where he explains that
Wouldn't you know?
Amulet is a talisman. It's concentrated good, and that every 100 years there is a portal, or this portal rather is susceptible to the monsters crossing over. So they need to engage in this ceremony that protects the evil from crossing over. And once again, wouldn't you know it, gosh darn it, 100 years ago exactly to the day, that's tomorrow. Wow. So
what a coinky dink.
What a coinky dink. And so it's up to us right now to find a virgin for this ceremony. Now, you mentioned a little bit ago about Dracula. It didn't quite work for you. I will say, you know, again, I have heavy nostalgia glosses on this, but that's not to say that I'm not going to be able to be objective and fair about the film. And one of the things I do recognize is that this sort of has a villain problem in the same way that Marvel movies have a villain problem, where they're really not given much to work with. They're just kind of there. The heroes get all the screen time. The heroes get all the motivation outside of a very sort of ham-fisted, oh, the bad guy wants this thing to be able to take over the world or whatever realm or whatever dimension. But it's always to have control of the world, essentially. And then that's about it, right? And then for the rest of the movie, so like Gilman, for example, Creature from the Black Lagoon, doesn't really have a full-on scary scene. It shows up, it launches the coffin onto the ground with Frankenstein, and then he doesn't show up again until the end of the movie, where he crawls out of the sewer, advances on Horace, who just picks up a shotgun that happens to be right there and shoots him dead. And that's it. So, like, if you were to say, like, here's the adventure of Gilman, that's a pretty shitty story. Guy shows up, gets out of his sewer,
character arc
is
for
immediately
Gilman.
shot by a shotgun that happens to be laying on the ground that this kid picks up. That's not a fun, interesting story.
Not at all. Especially for what Homeboy had to go through to get in that fucking costume and shit. I'm sure you saw that.
Exactly. We're going to talk. Yeah. So I was going to mention the fact that, like, of all of the costumes, that one is my favorite. And part of it, I think, is because it was two newbies who had never been tasked with anything before. Winston hired them and gave them this opportunity because they were talented, and talented they were, but they didn't really understand the ramifications of makeup in terms of how it was going to affect the actor. So they basically made it was actually a two-piece suit that was essentially a one-piece suit, where you had the entire body as one latex part, and then the head as another. And the head had two very, very modest pinholes in it that you really couldn't see through at all. And then they glued the head to the body so that there was no seams to be found anywhere in the costume.
What could go wrong?
Yeah. The problem is that the actor could not get out of the suit for 12 hours, and there was no place to use the bathroom. There was no way to eat, drink, whatever. So this guy had to not use the bathroom, or just use the bathroom and go on his own self for 12 hours, and also just have giant gobs of sweat inevitably from being trapped in this latex suit. I do not envy him at all. And if anything, he's probably the biggest trooper in this entire film.
Yeah. I almost wonder if they didn't cut his part a little short, because the whole thing was just so shitty. They're like, dude, we got to get this guy out of here.
Yeah, right.
Just shoot him. Shoot me.
Oh, shit. The union rep's here. Quick. End the scene.
Right. Yeah. And wrapped. And that's Gilman, everybody. Gilman. Yes.
Let's get him out
You
of
did
that.
great.
Yeah, no, right now. Yeah, let's get him out of that. Just like we were planning to. Just like
Yep.
we were planning to. Union rep.
All the time. Yeah, it was in the script.
And now, as far as the film going back, the other thing it does nice with the introduction of Frankenstein to Phoebe is there's a nice reference to the original old school black and white Frankenstein, where she's sitting there pulling flowers by a lake and he just kind of wanders in there. And very quickly, she realizes, she being Phoebe, the main character's younger brother from earlier, or younger sister rather, realizes that this Frankenstein character is actually quite nice. And so...
Monster with a heart of gold.
Yeah. She then introduces Frankenstein to her family and friends. All of them panic except for her brother Sean, who is willing to sack up a little bit, goes and says hello. They find out he's a nice guy, so they accept him and Phoebe, both of them, into their club. Again, he's that gentle giant sort of character. They become friends very quickly. Along the way, Dracula finds the location of the amulet, and this spurs one of our favorite mainstream 80s movies devices, which is the montage. You need a montage. Good old classic montage. And the funny thing is that, Rudy really gets the bulk of the montage. Most of the montage is Rudy making the weapons. He's making wooden stakes. He's making silver bullets, both of these in shop class. He's also stealing a bow and arrow from an archery range that he happened to just find or whatever. We've also got a very little moment where Eugene writes a letter to the military in crayon saying, hey, there's some monsters here, please help. That's actually going to come back at the end. And then we've also got, one of the 80s tropes that you couldn't get away with, where all of the kids in Frankenstein are looking at the exposed pictures, and I do mean exposed pictures of Patrick's sister that Rudy happened to take when he was in the treehouse earlier. Very sort of Porky's moment again.
Fucking awesome treehouse. We haven't even spoken on that. I miss, it's really sad that, that doesn't exist anymore, that kids don't really have tree houses or go out and build When I was a kid that age, we used to go out and actually build tree houses. I had access to a lot of scrap wood and stuff laying around. My dad was in construction, so I could go, forage for supplies and neat little things and use my imagination. Like this would make a cool, periscope or, peephole or any number of things that, and then, it became like Goonies. It's our time up here, and once you're in your treehouse, that was your little fortress of solitude, if you will. And everybody kind of, you always had a tree on someone's property that you could operate on and make said tree house in someone's backyard. But I feel like that's not so cool anymore. Kids don't need tree houses.
Yeah, no, dude. They're like, hey, I built a Minecraft treehouse that's way doper than this. So,
and it probably was. Yeah,
also got
probably
horses and pigs and shit that I can play with too. So,
yeah, I should. I may go build a treehouse, just out of nostalgia for the Monster Squad. Yeah, I got a tree. I could do it. It can be done.
I think it was also one of those things where, dads were more than happy to get some alone time. It's like, I'm going to spend all day up here. Like, okay, honey, I'm sure going to miss
ya.
Yeah,
you want any smokes?
Beer and football, bro. Let's go.
I'll supply you with cigarettes
and
beer.
Can we sleep up here? Absolutely, you can.
Right.
I'm going to miss you, sweetheart.
With a little luck, they'll find some Playboys, and I won't even have to have the talk with them. They'll just teach themselves, figure it all out up there in the old treehouse, and come back down to be a man.
Absolutely.
And now, a quick word from our sponsor.
Now see here, gentlemen, settle down now. The prestigious order of the Monster Hunting Consortium is hereby in session.
Hear, hear.
Let me first thank you for joining me here during this, the evening of the full moon. Despite many strange occurrences, we can all take solace in the fact that each of us is in the presence of the most esteemed monster hunters that our beloved Lady England has to offer.
Long live the Queen!
Long live my cat!
Cats make the best rulers. Egypt taught us this.
Gentlemen, before we read last week's minutes, it has come to my attention that Mr. Cheney has a matter of utmost import that he wishes to discuss post-haste. Mr. Cheney, I yield you the podium, sir.
With gratitude, Headmaster. Gentlemen, it is with no buoyancy of heart that I bring about this most urgent matter. As you all recall, On the heels of a recommendation by our most esteemed Mr. Van Helsing, it was determined that this order's next target should be that of a werewolf.
It ain't all my chickens.
I saw it shopping for discount cheese.
I just assumed we was dressing the wildlife in fancy linens.
Yes, well, there really is no sense in pursuing such nonsense as a werewolf when Count Dracula sits high atop his perch in Transylvania. And so here tonight, I wish to formally lodge an objection. Excuse me. Oh, an objection. An objection. Yes, well, the whole werewolf nonsense just...
Order!
What is the meaning of this? I do apologize, Mr. Van Helsing. I believe I had some discount cheese stuck in my throat just now.
I mean for this objection.
Yes, well, the whole werewolf nonsense just seems a bit silly now, doesn't it?
Did you just snarl?
Nonsense. Merely a sniffle.
A man without a powerful sneeze is no man at all.
My father used to scare me every time he went achoo.
I went half me life thinking a sneeze was how the French say I love you.
Gentlemen, it is with no ease of voice that I dare say the whole reason for Mr. Cheney's objection is that he, himself, is the werewolf.
I don't know about that.
Order, I say, order!
A werewolf? That's preposterous. Just because I prefer rare meat and use my hind legs to scratch my neck means nothing of the sort.
A man who doesn't eat rare meat is no man at all.
My cat, Mr. Whiskers, loves raw meat. I brought him with me here today, I did.
I once adopted a cat that turned out to be a badger. Scratched me in the balls, he did. Been 7 years, still don't piss straight.
Did you say your cat was here with you?
Certainly. Mr. Whiskers loves people.
No! My greatest fear! Must resist, but can't! See? Do you all see what I mean?
Mr. Cheney, what is the meaning of all this running around? Control yourself, good sir.
He can't control himself. He is a werewolf. We've got to find some silver alloy and put him down for good.
He chased that cat right through the window, he did.
Mr. Whiskers! His veterinarian said that he wasn't supposed to get eaten.
I ate a cat once. Kinda gamey, really. But I'd eat one again.
Gentlemen, order! Order, gentlemen!
I'm coming for you, werewolf!
I wonder if we'll ever have a meeting that doesn't end with someone smashing a window.
Me mum says eyes are the window to the soul. She's also blind, if that changes anything.
If he doesn't eat that cat, is it okay if I do?
Now, that is quite enough. Now, everyone just settle down. We have a meeting to proceed with. I do hope Mr. Cheney is able to figure out what is wrong with him. He gets this way every full moon. Now, Mr. Tiggs, if you will, please read the minutes.
And now, back to the show.
Now, in the film, we've got the first sort of big set piece, and this is after a quick shot of the Wolfman turning into the wolf as in a phone booth. We just get sort of a quick go from left to right, quick cut there, works very effectively. And this is where they go to actually Dracula's house. Now, there's a quick scene where they establish that supposedly Lisa, Patrick's sister, is a virgin, so they've recruited her to do the incantation. And then after that, again, they're going to Dracula's house, and after some protestation from Horace, they still enter, and there's a nice little exciting showdown where we get all of them sort of in the middle of a hallway. They're being attacked by the monsters. They're flanked by Wolfman in one direction, Dracula in another direction, the brides of Dracula in another direction. And then this is where we get the infamous Wolfman's got nards line, where they're basically like, what do we do? And he's like, kick him in the nards. And they're like, what? He's like, kick Wolfman in the nards. Wolfman doesn't have nards. Yes, he does. Kick him. So he kicks him. Wolfman grabs his nards and he goes, oh, Wolfman's got nards. And that's probably like the most famous, line from the entire film. And they're able to escape, but they find themselves at the back of another hall. They turn around. They see that there is a bronze statue of an explorer or someone, the arms all sticking up there, and they grab it, pull it down. It turns out that it works. There's a trap floor underneath them. They drop out, and they're able to go to the area wherein they find the amulet. Dracula's there. He's going to attack them. But once again, very conveniently, we don't need to explain why, but it turns out that all along this entire time, Horace has been carrying a piece of garlic pizza. And so, again, great opportune time for him to bust out that garlic pizza and jam it off the side of Dracula's face, which burns and actually leaves a very, very realistic looking wound mark. You know, that's the thing about these practical effects, man, whether it's just like a wound on the face or it's Dracula in a half human, half bat shot phase, Wolfman exploding and coming back together. Like, all of these practical shots are so well done and still literally 35 years later holding up, which is insane.
Yeah, no, they treated this seriously on a lot of levels. It was nice to see, and it made it easier to watch because this could have been, and maybe that's where the 12 mil went. You know, like they actually did take this seriously with the makeup effects and all of that. I would have liked to have seen a little. You know, what's really interesting is that then that means that maybe the part that I feel like this fell short on is the writing, which could have been. Which, you know, is the one part with Shane Black on board you would think would have excelled. But
okay, but Shane Black's also 24. This could very well be his first script. I believe it is.
Okay, yeah.
And if he sold it at 24, exactly. You know, he's in
but
his
Lethal
early
Weapon
20s.
came out this same year, and he starred in Predator this same year, all within 2 months of each other. So it was like Predator, this, and then Lethal Weapon, all back to back to back. So he was kind of on the uptick, you know?
Yeah, one of the things that Fred Decker actually said is he's like, it would have been really nice if Lethal Weapon had come out 2 months earlier, because then on the posters we could have put from the writer of Lethal Weapon, and they really feel like that would have done a lot to move some tickets, which it probably would have. It was a huge movie.
Do you know if Shane Black kind of disowned this movie at all because he had it sandwiched in between, he had like a flop sandwiched in between, Predator and Lethal Weapon?
No, they actually do interview him on the documentary that I watched.
Oh, they do? Okay.
Yeah, they actually have him in there. I get the sense that it was something he did that's like, honestly, dude, it's probably like the way we feel about our student films, right? Like, am I proud of them? Yeah, absolutely. Does it reflect where I am today? Not even a little bit.
Right, but at the time,
yeah,
if you have two major blockbusters come out back to back, and then this huge, weird indie kid flop, you know, that would be the one that you'd be like, Ixnay on the Monster Squad.
No, but it's a good movie. I think they all recognize that it's a good movie. It just didn't do well, you know. So,
I was
curious. but it definitely didn't seem like he was hanging his hat on it either.
Jason. We'll still let you like it.
Now, we've got the film sort of wrapping up at this point. We've got the kids and German guy. They meet in town center. And, well, right before that, actually, we've got the scene with the mummy. So they sort of meet up, and they're all in this, like, Jeep sort of thing that the German guy's driving. And the mummy is there. And he's walking by, and as they pass by, he grabs hold of the back of the car, and he's hanging on as they fly around. He's trying to attack the kids who are all screaming. We've got Rudy.
I love that scene.
It's a really good one. And Rudy is able to grab the bow and arrow, and he fires an arrow through one of the mummy's bandages, hits a tree, and then as the car continues forth, it starts unraveling. And soon, before you know it, the entire mummy has unwrapped, leaving a skull. And Rudy gets to lay down a one-liner that I'm sure was super badass 35 years ago, where he says, "See you later, Band-Aid breath."
So good.
So those are some of the elements that do retain some of that childlike atmosphere, and the writing definitely reflects that. But the one thing I will say, and I think it works as well, is that Shane Black and Fred Decker both, because basically Shane Black wrote it and then Fred Decker went and did like touch-ups and such. So they wanted it to feel, the dialogue that is, they wanted it to feel like children speaking, right? So, you know, we're not going to have them make some erudite reference to, 18th century history or whatever, because these are 13-year-old kids. What would 13-year-old kids say? Something like, "See you later, Band-Aid breath." So,
sure,
easy to criticize at damn near 40 years old, but, that's probably how kids spoke. And especially, back then, or, there wasn't as much exposure to, literature, art, and all this sort of stuff. Now, that's a super cool scene. We've also got Dracula who shows up, and now he's starting to show a little bit more of that malevolent side. where he finds out that the kids have this treehouse and straight shows up with dynamite. And because this is an 80s movie, what do you do when you have dynamite? You say a one-liner and walk away from the thing as it explodes. It's missing the slow motion, but everything else is right there. So he shows up with the dynamite, says, "Meeting adjourned," and then throws it and walks away as the treehouse explodes behind him. And that's exactly what you did in 1987 filmmaking, goddammit.
Oh, man, yes. Dude, there's so many opportunities. What's something cooler that he could have said than "meeting adjourned"? Well,
I don't know, you tell me.
Let me think. Your bark is worse than my bite. Because it's a tree. So there's bark, right? That would totally work.
Yes, thank you for explaining it. It was difficult and subtle.
Your bark is worse than my bites. And he throws a match. Slow motion, walk away. Cape flies in the wind. Yeah, dude, that's dope.
Oh, if only they could go back and have it back and do it all again.
Yes.
So now we do actually go to the town center. The kids find a church, and that's where Lisa, the sister, starts her incantation. And then we get the brides of Dracula who arrive in the middle of the street. This was always one of my favorite sequences growing up, just because there's something about the brides that's so simple, effective, and creepy. And so Rudy decides that he's going to be the one to deal with them, goes out with the crossbow, stake through the heart of the first one. Second one gets a little close. He's able to jam it through her. And we also from there see Dad. Dad drives in. He sees Dracula there. And actually at that point too, we get a very sort of quick dismissal of his cop partner. He has this partner who's always kind of like cracking wise. And he is in one of the cars when the dad shows up screeching. And Dracula has more dynamite that he lights and chucks under the car to blow up that guy in his car as well. So we get back-to-back explosions here. When Dad fires at Dracula, that's when he turns into a bat, which is the perfect opportune time for Mom to come out and see the transition and him fly away. Now she knows that something's been going on the whole time, and everything just got a little bit more complicated with regards to their relationship. And then after that, we get my favorite part. I don't know if it's everyone's favorite part or not, but with the Wolfman, where so Dad actually did shoot Dracula as he was a bat, and he ends up, Dracula that is, crashing into a building, and we get a very cool shot of him in a half man, half bat phase, sort of glued to the ground, like writhing and trying to get up. And the cop dad is going to say something or he's going to kill him when Wolfman comes from the back and attacks him. Now, Dracula is subdued, so what does Dad do? Grabs yet some more dynamite, lights it, sticks it in the waistband of the Wolfman, pushes him out a window, at which point the damn thing explodes midair, and the Wolfman's body parts all go flying in different directions. Now, you'd think that might destroy him, but it didn't. Because it's not a silver bullet, and only a silver bullet will kill him. So what happens? All of those parts come flying back together, sucking into one another, and recreating the Wolfman in his form. And Ryan, I think that these are the types of parts that this movie is living for. You can tell that they just loved the practical effects, loved playing with the monsters. And again, like it's such... You know, when we talk about how practical effects trump CGI all the time, this isn't just us being film snobs. This is evidential by the fact that you can go watch a movie that was made 20 years ago with heavy CGI and it's unwatchable.
Sure.
It's really hard to watch. Everything just looks so simplistic. Whereas going back to the Monster Squad 35 years ago or Star Wars 45 years ago, all of these practical effects still hold up and they're still enjoyable and they're still going to be in another 20, 30, and 40 years down the road. So this is what I love about the practical effects of this. It makes it feel like an amusement park ride, like those cool lines that Disney and Universal make for Harry Potter and all sorts of cool stuff, you know?
Yeah. I mean, but though I would also request though, Jason, like stop talking about like how many years ago these movies came out. Like you're making my life feel like an amusement park ride.
Absolutely. And I will say that we have come to pretty much sort of the end of the film. I mentioned it earlier. This is where we get the "My name is Horace" line, and Gilman just exits the sewer, approaches Horace, who grabs the shotgun. He's locked out of the store by the Wonder Years brother, Jerky Guy or whatever. And after Horace effectively kills Gilman, Guy's like, "Hey, fat kid, nice job." To which Horace cocks the shotgun and goes, "My name is Horace." And we get that cool, below, hero shot looking up at him as he cocks the shotgun. And
my name is Horace.
And we also get a cut on action where it cuts to that hero shot as he's cocking the shotgun. Beautifully done. Beautifully done.
Yeah.
And it's at this point that Lisa finishes the incantation, at which point the vortex should show up, but it doesn't. And what happens? It turns out that Lisa isn't really a virgin. Some good old-fashioned 1987 slut-shaming, as she's no longer able to save the world because she had the gall to have sex with Steve, even though she thinks he didn't count. So who's going to save the day? Phoebe. We have young little Eugene, who wrote the message to the police or the army in crayon. Says, "Is she a virgin?" They look at Phoebe and it's like, yes, she is. So scary German Italian guy goes, "Phoebe, we need you to save the universe. Repeat after me."
After I finish, I'm making my lasagna. Let's do the curse and the thing with the portal. Yeah. Terrible.
And so he grabs her, and so obviously she can't read German. He ends up repeating it for her, or rather reading it to her, and she's repeating him. And all the while, this is when Dracula is starting to approach her because he realizes that, she is a virgin. She can do some damage. And we get the infamous line where he's already destroyed a number of police officers. It's a very cool tracking shot following him along the side. He gets to the girl. He knocks back the German guy, picks her up by the face, holds her up in the air, looks her in the eye, and delivers this immortal line.
"Give me the amulet, you bitch."
Now, Ryan, I believe you mentioned that you wrote that was maybe a little bit much for you in this movie.
A little bit much. Yeah. Because, look, I'm already on my back foot trying to, I'm not going to think of this 7-year-old girl as a virgin. That's just a weird context to put her in the first place. And then now
I will say that it's less weird if she wasn't, but go ahead.
Fair. I'm just, you know what I'm but to sexualize this young child in the first place talk about, or the lack thereof. And then all of a sudden now you're holding her up and saying, "You bitch," blah, blah, blah. It's oh, Jesus. Man, these kids have seen some things, but I guess the other kids like smoking and they're all having sex. So kids,
Yeah. Now, funny thing, I will say this is another interesting anecdote from the film that, I don't know, seemed a little I don't know that I would have handled it as a director, but, got the reaction. And that is basically that for that line, and maybe this is actually why they didn't tell her that that's what he was going to say. And maybe that was the thing, is they're like, "Oh, you tell the 7-year-old that Dracula's going to call her a bitch." No, you do that. No, I'm the writer. No, I'm the director. I'm directing you. No, you're the director. You have to do this. You know what, Phoebe, we're not going to actually, so he's going to come up and he's going to say something kind of mean and scary. And when he does, we just want you to react to that. So the little girl had no idea what was coming. And not only that, but if you notice when he hisses at her, he's got these contacts in that you don't really see. And so the very first time that they filmed that scene, the young girl did not know what this guy was going to say. The director, Fred Decker, just said, "Hey, he's going to say something scary. Just react however you would." And he lifts her up and he says the line and then hisses at her. And they said that her fear was so real that she went to scream, but didn't. Her scream got caught in her throat and died out in the middle of it. And they couldn't capture it. And then we're like, "I'm sorry, sweetie. We're going to have to do that one more time." So they ended up having to go and get it a second time. But you could still see in her face that that is very, very real fear.
Sure.
But poor girl was so scared the first time that literally her scream caught in her throat and couldn't even like come out.
Oh man, yeah, I would have hated to have been the sound guy on that set in that
I'm
moment.
a horrible person. If this movie doesn't do well, I'll know why. But yeah, but immediately after that, of course, we've got our old buddy Frankenstein. Frankenstein is there to protect his friend Phoebe and save the day. He grabs Dracula, turns him around, looks him in the eye, and says, "Bogus," in a truly Bill and Ted sort of way, and knocks him back, at which when he goes flying and lands on a wrought iron gate spike that is driven through his heart. Now, here's the thing. Does some damage, but still not a wooden stake. So this doesn't actually kill him, but it does allow time for the vortex to open and start swallowing all of the monsters. And Frankenstein's trying to hang on for your dear life. So is Dracula, but Van Helsing is there. And Van Helsing reaches out from the vortex and grabs Dracula and wrestles him back into the vortex to take him back, but not before looking at the kids and giving them a big thumbs up to let them know that they did an
love the
A-okay
thumbs
job.
up. The thumbs up is in my notes. Absolutely.
And then
okay.
Yeah, the kid looks back and gives them a thumbs up as well with all of the wind blowing in their face and them hanging on for dear life.
Fuck yeah, Van Helsing. We did it together.
Yeah. And we also get a nice little tender moment of Phoebe, crying for Frankenstein not to go because she's his friend and she doesn't want him to go. And the music actually swells very nicely and sort of reinforces that moment. And then she ends up throwing him her stuffed bear. It's a very sweet little moment that he takes back with her. And when the vortex closes, all is well. And who would arrive but the army? The army all of a sudden arrives. And they're like,
to crayon notes.
"Hey,
yeah.
where's Eugene? We got your message." And it's like, wow, that sure is a lot of people for a hand-drawn crayon message from a 7-year-old. But you do get the sense that, again, this is a kid in his 20s just kind of playing around with stuff and not taking it too seriously. And that's, of course, when we get our Hallmark, two consecutive hallmarks of 80s films to close us out, which is where the very last line is the protagonist saying the name of the film, followed immediately by the custom hip-hop song that is also the title of the movie. So,
yes.
Who are you
This
guys? The general asks, and Sean looks around and then looks back at him and says, "We're the Monster Squad." And then right, and then you get like, "We're the Monster Squad." Hibbity hop, bam, bam, whatever shit.
This was when suburban culture was trying to co-opt urban culture, and they didn't know how to do it yet. Like, they've kind of figured it out somewhat, but this was what was the Itchy and Scratchy cartoon with the Poochie? Was it Poochie with the dog? And he was like had the skater shades on and all that. And then right after that, we had the Bartman. Do the Bartman. That's what all of this reminded me of. It also had a very, very mid 80s Super Bowl shuffle vibe. I don't know if you remember the Super Bowl shuffle.
It's Super Bowl shuffle. Yes, of course I remember.
Because whoever was doing this could not rap for shit. He's just like documenting things that happened in the movie, spoken over a hip hop beat of some kind. Yeah.
First came Dracula, now the Wolfman too. The mummy and the girl are swimming in the pool. We need silver bullets, we need wooden sticks. Normal stuff won't stop because they live on hate. Speak some magic words from a virgin's lips. Baby, that'll shake and make them slip and trip. There's no turning back, gotta fight the fight. Yeah, the Monster Squad's gonna jam tonight.
And, that brings us to the end of the infamous 80s classic, The Monster Squad. So really enjoyable movie. Again, for me, it's just 100% nostalgia glasses. There's definitely problems with the film and aspects that don't make it great, but it's just a super fun romp. And again, it's near and dear to my heart. It's any of those films that we all have that we grew up with that, when you watch later, you're like, it's, but I will say that like, this movie actually is much, much better than a lot of those movies that I go back to.
Sure. I will agree.
I think it still holds up today. I think anybody can watch it. Like, yes, it's definitely got a kid's vibe. But again, just on the strength of the practical effects, the costumes, the production design, the makeup, it's solidly acted. It's well directed. It's got great pacing. So yeah, all in all, a very, very solid movie. So
it's an hour and 20 minutes. It's not going to waste your time. Yeah. Go watch it.
You can give it the 82 minutes. You've got 82 minutes. Now, before we get into our 3 adjectives and final ratings, do want to remind you all to go ahead and subscribe wherever you listen to us, as well as hit us up with some reviews. We'd love to get some more reviews going. It really helps spread awareness of this program. And if you enjoy what we're doing here, that's the best way that you can help us out. Now, Ryan, I'll go ahead and defer to you first, which I know is always a little dangerous because sometimes you do steal my adjectives. But regardless, go ahead and give us your 3 adjectives for the Monster Squad.
I mean, there probably will be very similar to yours because there's only so much you could say about this. But I do have nostalgic because, of course, it's a nostalgic film. Not... for all the reasons we talked about. Just moving on. The next one is romp because it's a fun romp. Like, just go watch this movie. There's no reason to not have seen. If you have not seen this movie, it still holds up today. Like Jason said, it's a fun film. It doesn't waste too much of your time, and it's unfortunate that this doesn't have more of a platform. Like, you can go rent this, but this isn't something that you're going to see on like TBS on a Sunday or something like that. Like I wish that, that this was more accessible. I probably would have seen this by now, but you have to go to it. It's not going to come to you. Go see this movie. The third one is time capsule, in a different way because nostalgia, yes, for all the 80s tropes and stuff, but this was a time capsule for me for just the lifestyle, like free range parenting. I love free range parenting. Like I remember being able to just go off with my friends on our bikes and be home by dark when the street lights came on. And, just the way that, that era allowed you to be so free and it was worry free. And, we weren't sitting in front of television because there was, only so many channels and, I didn't have a video game system back then and all of that. So there were so many reasons just to go outside and go play and be kids and, cops and robbers and the whole thing, have Nerf guns and all of the things. So yeah, it was a nostalgic film from a cinematic standpoint, but it also was a time capsule for me and a bit of a throwback to that era. And it did it very, very well. How about you, buddy?
I love how 45 minutes ago you're like, dude, can you stop bringing up all the aging stuff? It's making me feel old. Now you're like, I'm free range parenting when I can just go out and play with my friends.
We had something called fresh air.
So yes, I actually did have one of those verbatim, which is nostalgic. The other 2 I have, again, we can make this quick, is brisk and fun. I have a brisk, fun, and nostalgic. That's like the perfect way to encapsulate this movie. Again, it's not something if you're going to analyze it. But yeah, see it to remember the Universal monsters. See it to remember what 80s movies featuring preteens used to feel like. Brisk, fun, and nostalgic. Now, we're going to go ahead and give our formal ratings. If this is your first time listening, I give a star rating out of 5. Ryan gives a grade rating, F through A+. We'll go into why we do that at some other episode. But Ryan, please give us your grade rating for the Monster Squad.
I'm giving this a B.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason to give it any less. It's a fun movie. It's not A status. I mean, let's get real here. Like, maybe if you tell me right now you're going to give this 4.5 stars or 5 stars or whatever, dude, go for it. It's your party. I'm here to celebrate you. This is a fun movie, and I think that a lot of people would mark this up if they had seen this as a kid. And then you get to see it again and you're like, oh man, dude, I love that movie. Yeah. But I unfortunately did not have that, knee-jerk response to this film because this was the first time I've seen it. So if you're going to ask me as a, old man to give it a rating, I'm going to tell you it's a B movie for me. And I think that it deserves every bit of that. How about you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, younger me would absolutely give this 7 stars out of 5, right? If you were asking me, what does this film mean to you personally? Yes, I would give it 5 stars. In trying to be at least somewhat objective, I am giving it 4.5 stars. You're probably right. Honestly, like if I hadn't seen this movie first time walking into it, it's probably a 4-star movie as an adult. I will say, even on a first time viewing, that score does go up as your age goes down for sure. So,
okay.
Again, if you're on the younger side of things, you're going to like this movie more than if you're a little bit older. But
I'm not.
Still, everybody can appreciate it, right? Even
yes,
even
I had a lot of love for this movie. I don't have a bad word to say about it. I just think there are better, movies that deserve that higher rating. But this is a great movie. Yeah, I've nothing bad to say about it. The Mummy was great. Wolfman was great. The kids were great. It was an hour and 20 minutes. Didn't waste your time. It was fun. And, and it hit all the notes. Like you said, I did have a bit of a villain problem. There's a couple things that, could have maybe chalked it up a little bit. But yeah, it was what it was.
Absolutely, yeah. Even Kenneth Turan, the infamous Los Angeles Times critic back in the day, was a champion of this film and said that, basically it just makes you feel like a kid again, right? And so it's definitely that's kind of the bulk of the response here, right? Is if you're just looking for something light, again, it's a kid's movie, so to speak, but with a sort of adult veneer. A lot of fun. Do go ahead and check out the Monster Squad. And we would also like to invite you to come check us out. Right? We're on the internets and elsewhere. So we do have the social medias at Esoterica Cinema. You can reach out to us on your favorite one and see if we're there. We probably are. And we've also got an email, esotericacinema@gmail.com. We would love to have you reach out and let us know what you think about the Monster Squad, what you think about our review of the Monster Squad, what you think about any of the movies that we've looked at here on this show. We invite you to come and start a discussion with us at esotericacinema@gmail.com. Or you can also check us out on the website. If you go to the website, we'll have some direct messaging that you can employ there. And there's just a lot of good stuff for you to check out. If you're not listening to the episodes on the website, we do have a player there with the last 4 episodes right on the main page. There's a separate link to a dedicated web player, so you can just listen right through Safari or Chrome. And one of the other things that we have on there is the master list, our master list of all 200 films that we consider in a given season that we pull from at the end of every episode to see what the next movie we are going to watch is. So let's see, Ryan. This film is 13 of 20 for season 3, so we've got 7 more films to go here. As always, we are going to use our true random number generator to select a number from the list. So if you want to play along, as long as you're not driving, go ahead and go to esotericacinema.com, scroll down to the master list, and let's see what number we have here. So you ready to do this, Ryan?
I am.
All right. Random.org, true number generator, 1 through 200. We find that we have come to the number 16. 16 right at the top. So we come in here to 16. Okay, interesting film. I remember this is one that you threw on, and I've never seen this film. I believe it's more of a somber film. Now, let's look at the 2 films above and below that we didn't get. At number 15, we have Terrence Malick's first film, Badlands, which I have not seen. I do like Terrence Malick, but I didn't like Days of Heaven, so I have no idea if I'm going to like his first film. The other film after that is the head trip film, from what I understand, Beyond the Black Rainbow, which I would have loved to get down and dirty on some head trip sci-fi. But no, instead...
We'll get there.
Yeah, we will. Instead, we are going to look at I believe it's a rather somber and emotional film, Beasts of the Southern Wild. Do you have a description for us, Ryan?
I do. Google has this described as 6-year-old hush puppy lives with her father, Wink, in a remote Delta community. Wink is a stern taskmaster, but he is preparing his young daughter for the end of the world. When Wink falls mysteriously ill, nature seems to fall ill with him. Temperatures rise, the ice caps melt, and fearsome prehistoric beasts called aurochs run loose. Rising waters threaten to engulf their community, sending Hush Puppy in search of her long-lost mother. Released in 2012. Yeah, I don't know a whole lot about this. I remember this getting a lot of critical acclaim back in the day.
Yeah, same.
So this has kind of just been one that's been on my radar for a while. But this guy went on to go make films like Wendy, which I think is also on our list. I really want to see that too. That was kind of a realistic Peter Pan film. And I heard that was pretty decent. So yeah, this guy kind of rolls in the world of the fantastical or whimsical, I think. So yeah, I'm excited for this one.
Definitely. Same here. So if you would like to watch ahead of next week, be sure to check out Beasts of the Southern Wild. As for today, thank you so much for joining us here on Esoterica Cinema for the Monster Squad. Really hope that you enjoyed the film, whether or not you grew up with it or not. As always, we will catch you next time on Esoterica Cinema. Enjoy the movies.